Well, Kamal, we're at the Royal Horse Guards Hotel. We've just heard from Nigel Farage, wrapped up a very successful reform press conference here announcing 29 defections to the party. But can he shake off the row with Rupert Lowe?
Well, he tried to walk away from some of those questions today. We'll be getting into that in a few minutes. But also some really interesting material from him on this idea of uniting the right. Can Kemi Badenoch survive?
And what's the role of Dominic Cummings, of all people, in the discussions? Welcome to the Daily Tea from a reform press conference in central London with me, Camilla.
And me, Kamal Ahmed. So, Camilla, we've both got our big notebooks.
I know.
We've taken
your notebook's
lots
bigger
and
than
lots
mine.
of. My notebook is bigger than yours, but we've got lots and lots of points
better.
that we've made. Shall we work through this day? We were called here over the weekend for this important announcement that Nigel Farage said he was going to make. So we all sat here dutifully. You can see the seats still out in front of us. And they produced this sort of parade of councillors, mostly independents, some Conservatives.
Well, to be fair, 15 Conservatives,
15
so
Conservatives.
half of the 29 are Conservatives.
One former Labour councillor who had already moved to become independent over Labour's trans policies, and I think actually most surprisingly, one Liberal Democrat.
A Liberal Democrat has gone to reform. Who would have thunk it? So on that level, you know, that's a good positive announcement from reform to try and knock these terribly negative stories forward from the row with Rupert Lowe. However, a couple of initial observations. They start the press conference with playing a video of Reform's MPs.
Yes, we were going through the cuts they must have made to that over the weekend.
It reminded me a little bit of the Spice Girls, 2 become 1. No, 5 have become 4. Suddenly, Rupert Lowe has been completely erased from that campaign video, and yet his ghost remains at this press conference because clearly everybody wanted to know what the future is for Rupert Lowe, inside, outside the party, and how damaging has it been for reform. So I thought that was very noteworthy. He did address the issue in the speech. Let's hear him talking about how the focus is very much May the 1st, the local elections, and not on the unseemly set-to that we've witnessed over the course of the last 10 days.
Now, you might have noticed that we have been through a little bit of turbulence over the course of the last couple of weeks. We've been increasingly concerned about the behaviour of one of our members of Parliament. And when we found out that some serious complaints had gone in, we thought, you know what, let's just suspend the whip and let's find out what the truth is. And we will wait. First, we will get the report from the independent King's Counsel, who's been appointed. I don't know exactly when that's going to be, but some anticipation that it might happen during the course of this week. And later on, perhaps it'll take some time, we'll hear from the relevant parliamentary committee too. Has it caused some consternation? Of course it has. Any argument that seemed to happen within the family does. But I can promise you that in terms of our progress and our planning, that upset is very much at the edges.
He landed a big point, I think. There has been some discussion about whether there are actual tensions between Nigel Farage and his chairman, Zia Youssef. Now, Zia, interestingly, opened this event with his own little speech, which I think was Nigel Farage signalling that reporting on possible tensions was rubbish. And then he made a very firm statement, which I'm sure will be welcomed by lots and lots of people, about the racism that Zia Youssef has faced, a British Muslim, has faced since the allegations were made against Rupert Lowe, allegations, of course, that he denies, that Zia Youssef had faced racist attack, particularly on X. And the point that Nigel Farage was making was that what he describes as the mainstream media, and certainly what he called the 2 old parties, had not leapt on this in the same way they would have done if those attacks, for example, had been on the famous left-wing black MP Diane Abbott. And I think that was a very strong message that he sent, and also probably at this stage puts to bed any idea of any kind of tension between Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef. And I think he kept Zia Youssef as a speaker to show that there could be more than one tall poppy in reform.
But I do want to say one thing. Some of the online abuse and, frankly, outright, overt racism that has been showed against a senior member of this party, had it been shown towards any other member of the ethnic minorities, from the Labour and Conservative parties, every one of you in the journalistic arena in this room would have been in total and absolute uproar. It would have been a major national story. But because it's happening to us, no one seems to really care.
It was interesting because before we came into this press conference, somebody had put up this gallery on X of all of the people that Nigel Farage has fallen out with over the course of his political career, going back to the UKIP and Brexit Party days as well. And it's sort of this gallery including people like Ben Habib, former Deputy Leader of Reform, Suzanne Evans, who used to be heavily involved in UKIP, even Robert Kilroy-Silk.
Yes.
Remember him?
I haven't seen a tan like that since I last looked at Donald Trump, to be honest. But yes, you made a joke in that he had opened a tanning salon, possibly in Bexley Heath. I'm not sure if that's true, but he hasn't.
I was told this afternoon that it's actually living in Spain. But the point is that
topping up his tan,
no doubt. There is this kind of suggestion that Nigel Farage is the star player who can't be a team captain. So I asked him about that in the huddle after the press conference. Nigel Farage, welcome to the Daily Tea. Thank you very much indeed for your time. How credible is Zia Youssef's claim that you can become the next Prime Minister if you can't keep a coalition of 5 MPs in check?
Well, I tell you what, we've got no chance of being the next Prime Minister if we have a party that has somebody fighting against it and behaving in a way that leads to great concern. You know, you need unity in political parties, not big splits and divisions. And we saw that with the last Conservative government. They were absolutely riven with division. It's not going to happen to us.
But are you somebody that politically assassinates his enemies?
No, they normally do it to themselves through history. In this case, let's wait to see what the inquiry says.
The other funny thing about the huddle, Kamal, is as the questions went on, people started asking more about Rupert Lowe. And how shall I put it? Nigel Farage was getting increasingly frustrated with some of the journalists.
Hi Nigel, Rupert Lowe's threatened legal action
Good.
over reforms plans. It's interesting whether you'd be prepared to fight him in court on that. If he took you to court, would you fight him in court?
I shall look forward to it, thank you.
Nigel, just quickly on the same issue as Amy here. Do you think that Rupert Lowe is responsible for?
Yes.
Sorry.
whipping up that racism?
Rupert did say that he was asked to tone down his speech on that.
Just on the racism issue, Kamal, as a man of Muslim heritage, do you agree with what Farage is saying there? Because he then had a go at The Guardian. So after I asked my question and everyone else did, he said to The Guardian, you've not covered this, you've not covered the racism that Zia Youssef has had to put up with over the course of the last fortnight. I mean, he does make a good point there, doesn't he? Do you agree with this idea that we just turn a blind eye because it's reform?
I think there are parts of the media that do just that. They look at reform as a party that has in the past, or certainly its earlier iterations, had problems with racism. It certainly has problems with racism with some of its members. And so what Nigel Farage needs to do is he needs to break out of that box. And this is a big signal about that. There was one ethnic minority candidate that they announced today. Zia Youssef is obviously a big signal. And I think Nigel Farage has made a serious decision some months ago, and this all goes down to the possible reform flirtations with Tommy Robinson, and that is connected to the Rupert Lowe debate. But Nigel Farage has made a serious decision that his party has got to detoxify on the issue of attitudes to British ethnic minorities. Doesn't mean they aren't tough on immigration, and they are separating those two issues out, which they should do. So actually, I think the fact that he raised it today is significant, and it will be positive for many ethnic minority British voters who might be looking at reform, because lots and lots of people on the right, ethnic minority people on the right, these values of family,
yes,
community, country,
yes,
proud of your country, will really play well to
even
them.
Faith, actually.
And faith.
All faiths.
Nigel Farage knows that, and he's producing a signal there, which I think does help in the discussions. And I think the media should be looking at itself in terms of how do we cover things. And if these had been, do you remember the Tory party donor who made the comments about Diane Abbott?
Yeah, Frank Hester.
That was leading the news.
Yes.
Whereas here, almost nothing.
Almost nothing. I think he's trying to differentiate, isn't he, as well? He was asked a little bit later on in that huddle what do you think about deporting illegal immigrants? He said, well, I've always supported deporting illegal immigrants, but what I don't like is the language of repatriation. This idea that Rupert Lowe has pushed the envelope and is basically trying to make this claim that, you know, if people are here and they're of foreign nationalities, you know, do they belong here? Are they really British? It's that kind of rhetoric which I think Nigel Farage finds uncomfortable. Also, how does he broaden his fan base from where they currently are in the polls? So interestingly, over the weekend, they gained a point despite this row with Rupert Lowe. They're now on average on around 26%, Tories trailing well behind now on 21%, Labour just in the lead. They're predicted Reform to win this Runcorn by-election, which has been called following the suspended sentence that was given to the Labour MP Mike Amesbury for punching that constituent. I think there is huge pressure on Reform to win that by-election, which I'm sure you agree with. Second of all, have they now overcooked somewhat their aspirations for the local elections? Because when we were last at a Reform press conference, you and I, he was talking about winning hundreds of seats. And I appreciate this is a very good start in terms of these defections, but he is going to have to put in a stellar performance for him to justify some of these claims. Not least, by the way, Zia Yousaf's claim on the stage earlier that he is the next UK Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were at that press conference where he made that very, very bold prediction about what could happen on May the 1st. We said at that moment we would have to watch that very, very closely. On his answer on deportation, he actually made quite a smart little extra addition to that answer, which was bringing in David Blunkett. David Blunkett, former Home Secretary, beloved of the Labour right, beloved of that kind of tone of working class man from Sheffield, done good, used to be a councillor, then became a very prominent cabinet minister under Tony Blair. That David Blunkett was a man who supported deportations and decoupling, as you say, the deportations argument from the repatriation alien cultures. Let's not forget, though, that Nigel Farage has talked about alien cultures and not hearing an English voice on trains, etc. So he's got a journey to go on, but he's doing the right journey because 26%, he needs to get another 5%. And where does he get that 5% from? He's got to get that 5% from people who haven't yet moved to Reform, and they're not going to be on the harder edges of the party.
Let's actually listen to someone who has made that move from the Conservatives to Reform. We heard from Stephen Atkinson, who had been the Conservative leader of Ribble Valley District Council. And he actually summed up in his speech why it is that as a Tory he no longer feels represented by his party. And he also spoke of the appeal of Reform.
To paraphrase Edmund Burke, all it takes for bad things to prevail is for good men and women to do nothing. And that's the reason why I make this decision for the greater good. And like so many others, I feel betrayed by decades of broken promises. Tory MPs, ministers and Prime Ministers have failed over the last 14 years. The Conservative parliamentary has been found out. It's a party of power and privilege, and not about service.
Kamal, this argument about democracy in some way being denied to swathes of the electorate is very reminiscent of the language around Brexit. You know, you're hearing from a northern Conservative there saying the parliamentary party no longer represents me or my people, very much in the red wall there, Ribble Valley, speaking not only, by the way, to disgruntled Tories, but also, I think, red wall Labour voters who have flip-flopped between Labour and then Boris Johnson and now are languishing possibly in Nowheresville because they probably don't like the cut of Keir Starmer's jib at the moment either, what with the cut to winter fuel allowance and all the rest of it. But it is this idea of representing the disenfranchised. In a way, of course, it has been inconvenient to Reform to have some of these local elections cancelled. We did a great piece on the website, you should have a look at it, about the seats they were projected to win before Angela Rayner made those cuts and what they're projected to win now. But it's quite a clever tactic to kind of use that to their advantage, to be saying you're all victims of a sort of anti-democratic parliamentary movement and we're here to stand up for you.
When there's such a lack of trust in the political establishment. And then let's get on to Kemi Badenoch. We're going from this event today to the Centre for Policy Studies big conference on the future of conservatism. Kemi Badenoch is going to be speaking later on today. We will both be there. Then there's a big dinner in the evening, and there are lots and lots of speakers about the future of conservatism. I think Kemi Badenoch must be nervous. Her party's on 21% of the vote. You've written about this over the weekend for The Telegraph. I thought it was quite smart that the other person they asked to speak here was Heather Asker. She is a councillor from Saffron Walden and Uckfield, of course, in Kemi Badenoch's constituency. And Kemi Badenoch and all of her team must be watching this type of event, seeing all these councillors, many of whom have moved across from the Conservatives, and thinking, we're at 21% in the polls. Where is our momentum? Let's hear a little bit of what she had to say about why she had joined Reform.
The party's values of family, community and country are ones that are working as a working mother and local councillor very much resonate with me. One of the reasons I became a local councillor is because I want to leave my part of the world in a better place than I found it. I had hoped to stand for Reform UK in the Essex County Council elections, which were meant to take place in May. However, I watched in dismay as the Conservatives and Labour have worked together to deny any democracy to the voters in my area, as well as to millions of others throughout the country.
The other good thing, by the way, Kamal, is to see more women in Reform, by the way, just looking at Heather there and some of the other women that had lined up. OK, it is all still, I don't like the phrase, but it is a little pale, male and stale, the lineup. I mean, at one point we thought, is this a police lineup? I think Tim Stanley might be writing that in his piece today. Yeah. However, I had previously made the point that Reform has a bit of a woman problem. It seems very blokey at the top. So it's just good to see sensible female politicians represented.
Well, as we were saying, Camilla, this is actually quite a big day for the right in general, not just for Reform, but the Conservatives who've got this, well, Kemi Badenoch speaking at this big event later on this afternoon, just down the road from where we are in central London. And the story at the weekend, written by Tim Shipman, the political writer in the Sunday Times, that Nigel Farage and Dominic Cummings, great enemies in the past over the Brexit vote. Dominic Cummings, the head of the official Vote Leave campaign, pushing Nigel Farage out of the way, saying that Nigel Farage was toxic and if he was in charge of the Brexit referendum campaign, they would never win it. Lots of bad blood between them, which Nigel Farage actually reflected in some of the answers he gave. He said, we never got on. But Tim Shipman's piece revealed that the two of them had had a dinner, called an informal dinner, and that they had discussed the way the state works, and that's led to a lot of speculation that are those two plotting something around what's been described as unite the right. Nigel Farage very dismissive of it, but Camilla, what do you think about Kemi Badenoch on 21%, Nigel Farage 26, 27%, has the momentum. Is this coming from the Conservative side, trying to undermine Kemi Badenoch? Are the rumbles already starting about, is she the right leader for the party? Or is there a genuine attempt, not at leadership level, but within the parties, to have some form of coalition of the right to beat Keir Starmer?
So I think there's a sense of realism creeping in, particularly among senior Tories, that actually this isn't going to work if they both go it alone, that individually they cannot beat Labour, but together they might be able to. I think that Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farage are united on three different levels. They're united on their universal hatred of Tory MPs. They're united in their sense that Britain is broken and particularly that the whole of the state needs to be reformed in some way. And they're also natural political anarchists who just want to create merry hell. Now, the timing of that story in the Sunday Times was a little suspicious. We've had torrid headlines for Reform over the course of the last 10 days because of the row with Rupert Lowe. Suddenly this turns up on the front page of the Sunday Times and it moves the conversations forward somewhat. This was one meeting in December. It's not like these two are now in bed with each other. And indeed, there was a contradiction in the piece because it was talking about who else could lead the party and then throwing Boris Johnson back into the mix. And there's one person that would not endorse Boris Johnson to become Conservative leader or indeed Prime Minister for a second time, and that's Dominic Cummings. Intriguingly, I happened to have Michael Portillo, the former Defence Secretary and Tory big beast, on my show on Sunday reviewing the papers. And this is his analysis of why that story suddenly appeared in the Sunday papers.
He certainly has met Dominic Cummings. Whether they've been meeting, that is repeatedly, I think is more in doubt. I think you're more excited by this story than I am. My interpretation is that Farage and Reform UK have had a lousy 10 days, and some of the pressure has been taken off the Tories. The Tories, in the last 10 days, have thought, oh, maybe Farage is going to fold and crash and tumble. So I think this is a little bit of a spin, a little bit of a story put there to frighten the Tories. What frightens the Tories? Dominic Cummings frightens the Tories because he's been so destructive to them in the past. So I think this story of a meeting that I think took place some time ago, which I don't think was particularly lengthy, I think is a little bit of a spin. And, of course, if it takes some attention away from the terrible row...
How damaging?
I think amazingly damaging, the row within Reform UK. I mean, speaking personally, it's transformed my view of Reform UK. Now, a lot of people 10 days ago were talking about it seriously as, you know, potentially the next government.
Yes.
But I think a party that can't handle 5 MPs, you know...
Diversion tactic or no diversion tactic. I thought what was interesting about the councillors and the people who've defected revealed today is that a number of them were from places like Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, the sort of southern seats where Reform is not expected to be quite as strong. And I was sitting next to a volunteer from the southwest region for Reform, and he was saying that in Devon, Somerset, Cornwall, farmers, fishermen, those are the type of people that also might come to Reform. So the idea about this Unite the Right was that sort of Reform would be left to battle the northern red wall seats and the Conservatives would be left to battle the southern home county type of seats. But the wide group of councillors we've seen today, I think, undermines further this idea that the two parties can work together. They are politically so far apart, and I think it would do more damage to Reform than anything they would gain from Conservatives standing down in some seats in the north of England.
I was speaking to somebody who had defected from the Conservatives to Reform, and he was saying that he had been knocking doors over the weekend in Essex, very much in kind of Priti Patel's heartland, actually. And I said, has the Rupert Lowe issue registered much? He said, no, not at all. People are just talking about how to mend broken Britain, so very much Nigel Farage's language. He said there are some seats now, which I thought was a good expression, that are what I would describe as red kip. Okay, so they're like previously Labour-leaning, hugely concerned about immigration, patriotic voters worrying about the future of Britain. Just generally that's the offer. And that could be in a seat like Hemel Hempstead, as much as it could be a seat in somewhere in Northumbria, okay? So I thought that was interesting. And people are registering on the doorstep. And I said to him, be objective, because you've been on both sides of this right-wing divide. He said, literally, objectively, people are fed up. I have spoken to so many people saying, I will never vote for the Tories again, which puts Kemi Badenoch in a really difficult position. You've also, by the way, just back to Cummings, I mean, he has been traducing her on his X feed, saying that she's constantly playing iPad games all day, playing to this narrative that she's crazy and lazy. He's clearly a massive thorn in her side, doesn't think that she can cut the mustard. We were discussing this earlier, and this was the tone of my column. She has got a problem in comparison to the Thatcher years. This whole idea, well, look, she's got 4 years, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Thatcher took 4 years, give her some time. And there is a poll on the Telegraph website where when we ask people, what do you think of Kemi Badenoch? The overwhelming answer is she needs a bit more time. My point is, how much time has she actually got? I mean, we wait with trepidation for this speech today. I made the point that back in the day, Thatcher became Tory leader in 75. It was within a year that she made that Britain Awake speech that then got her labelled the Iron Lady by the Soviet newspaper, the Red Star. Of course, that was meant to be critical. She embraced it and it strengthened her whole position. Have we heard that kind of rhetoric from Kemi Badenoch yet?
Is she capable of that kind of rhetoric?
Well, that's the question. I don't know. I think she's got it in her, but I've suggested that she's this sort of Labour attack dog that's been neutered. She's gone from being a right-wing Rottweiler to the sort of little puppy that somebody carries around in a handbag. Why is she being so cautious? Take the gloves off, have a go.
Let's see the speech this evening. Let's see, they've then got another event tomorrow. She's also being hampered by the fact of Ukraine being a massive foreign policy issue where it's very difficult to be the leader of the opposition. And the fact is, as we have said on this podcast on a number of occasions, Donald Trump has obliged Starmer to shift right really, really heavily. Tomorrow, we're going to have the huge benefits round. Now, it is going to be significant. It is going to be about policy. This is the government's policy to cut the ballooning benefits bill. But for Keir Starmer, it will be a massive fight with his left-wing MPs. But will he really worry about that? He's got a big majority. The more he's taking on old left Labour, the better for his polling numbers. And the question for Conservatives is, at 21%, how many of the 121 MPs we have now are we going to be able to keep? I think we're sort of, some of the political sort of, firmament are trying to move on to the Unite the Right debate. Why would Reform unite with a party that could be flirting with the teens in polling numbers, which is as bad as it ever got under Rishi Sunak?
Also, again, the timing of her unveiling her policy platform tomorrow. So there's a lot going on this week. So we're covering today. She's speaking tonight. That may well be overshadowed, by the way, by reports of this event behind us that's just finished. She's then unveiling some policy ideas tomorrow, which is weird in itself because she said she was going to take 2 years to come out with policy. She just wanted to make the big macro arguments and not be nailed down on the details. She's clearly changed her mind on that. She's announcing this tomorrow at 10:30. But by 12:30 in the House of Commons, we're going to be hearing from the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions outlining how Labour is going to tackle the benefits bill. Therefore, once again, every time she makes a pronouncement, she's overtaken by events. And that's why she's not managing to get her voice heard. My argument would therefore be, if you're going to say anything at all, my goodness, it's got to be punchy. If these policy announcements tomorrow are sort of slightly ambivalent, oh, we'd like a cap on immigration, but we won't tell you what it is, oh, we're still having the debate about whether we should leave the ECHR, I would humbly suggest, what's the point of it?
Well, we'll be able to have that discussion tomorrow. Just to keep things in perspective, I think there have been something like 29 or 30 council by-elections since the last election, and Reform have only won 4 of those. Now, Nigel Farage would say, from a standing start, that's pretty amazing. In Scotland, for example, they're getting to 15 to 20% in the polls. And I spoke to Lee Anderson, obviously one of their MPs, just before Nigel Farage came and did the huddle with you, Camilla. And Lee Anderson made the point to me that May the 1st is a stepping stone. The one they've got their real eye on is the Senedd, the Welsh national elections for the Welsh Assembly next year. And they really feel that if they can have at least a good result on May the 1st in the England council elections, that will give them the building and the staging post to go on to Wales, where they could possibly really break the mould of UK politics.
Right, we better hot-foot it.
Yes, I can't hold my notebook anymore. It's quite heavy. It's such a big.
Heavy.
My notebook is so big. It's actually quite heavy. It's part of my gym exercise.
Which think tank are we going to? It's the Centre for Policy Studies. You're going to be speaking at a panel. We're going to hear Kemi Badenoch bring you all that tomorrow, along with the slashing of benefits and Kemi Badenoch's policy platform. It's a busy old time, Kamal.
It will be. Rejoin us again tomorrow, 5 p.m.